Hey guys, welcome back to yet another Xenoblade 3 theory video. I just keep having ideas and I gotta get them out somehow. This theory is about how Xenoblade 3 is going to fit into Tetsuya Takahashi's Perfect Works. For those unaware, Xenogears was originally intended to be part 5 in a planned 6-part video game epic. While there was only ever one Xenogears game, that didn't stop him from trying again. When Xenosaga came out, the idea was to focus the plots of those games on a rewritten version of the plans, starting with Part 1 and presumably moving forward. Unfortunately, due to a multitude of reasons, Xenosaga's story was heavily rewritten and cut down to 3 games instead of 6. But, after the success of Xenoblade, it would seem that Takahashi is trying to implement the Perfect Works plan again. You might be asking, how do you know if it's Perfect Works if the rest of the games didn't come out? And that's a great question. After Xenogears released, a Perfect Works book was published that includes things like artwork, cut content, character profiles, and extremely important story content. It's essentially the Monado Archives, but for Xenogears. One of the most important things it includes is a pretty detailed timeline of the Perfect Works plan, so we have a rough idea on how this huge story is supposed to go. Before we dive into the rest of the theory, I just want to ask that if you guys enjoy the content on the channel, please drop a sub on the channel and like this video. On all of my uploads this past month, it would seem like a majority of you watching haven't been subscribed, so I would really appreciate if you could. It lets me know that you like what I'm doing and allows me to make more stuff for you guys in the future. Also, it's free. One last thing, this video is 100% going to have Xenogears spoilers, so if you want to play that game, I'd recommend doing so before watching. Alright, with that, let's get to the timeline. So here's the basic story. In Episode 1, humans have long since left Earth, and there's a big interplanetary war going on. That's pretty much it. In Episode 2, due to some Zohar shenanigans, life forms very similar to humans begin sprouting up on a very distant planet. In Episode 3, after a couple thousand years, a sophisticated culture called Zeboim has finally emerged that's not too different from ours. Eventually their peace ends and nuclear war happens, essentially resetting this new humanity's progress all the way back to zero. Thousands of years pass again, and Episode 4 takes place. Surprise, surprise, there is yet another war, and this time between the nations of Shavat and Solaris. That is, until something cataclysmic happens and the war ends. Then, in Episode 5, another war is happening between 2 other nations. Like we covered before, Xenogears is just Episode 5. A lot happens in the game, and I don't have 2 hours to explain everything, but just know that a metric ton of stuff happens, and then the Zohar goes away, and there's peace, and blah blah blah. We know there's no peace, obviously, because in Episode 6, another war takes... Oh. Yeah, they never told us what happens in Episode 6. It apparently takes place right after Episode 5, and is described as the terminal point in Xenogears' world. Okay, so how does this all fit in with Xenoblade? Well, if we just look at the history and the events that take place in these games, we can actually place them pretty neatly into each one of the episodes. I think it's fair to say that after more than 20 years, some of the dates and specifics of each episode might have changed, but the general premises remain the same. The battle involving the Saviorite rebels we see in Xenoblade 2 is a pretty good candidate for Episode 1. Then, the Conduit does a thing, and we've got 2 new worlds with new people. We know in both Allrest and the Bionis and Mechonis universe, it takes a little bit for things to get going and for life to flourish. This in-between state is likely Episode 2. For Episode 3, I think that for Xenoblade 2's universe, Judicium is a pretty good parallel to Zeboim. Xenoblade 1 is a little hard to place, but I think that the Bionis and Mechonis just living in harmony satisfies the conditions well enough. Both of these situations eventually lead to war and the destruction of societies like Zeboim did. Then Episode 4 happens. This is pretty easy to place for Xenoblade 2. It's Torna. It even takes place 500 years before the main game, which is the same amount of time between Episodes 4 and 5 of Xenogears. As for Xenoblade 1, I think that the initial Bionis and Mechonis war is a pretty good contender for this. Admittedly, this is a stretch, considering that Xenoblade 1 was not technically intended to be a Perfect Works game, indicated by its original title. Xenoblade 2 has clearly assuaged all doubts that they're not trying it again. Moving on to Episode 5, it conveniently works out to be both Xenoblade 1 and Xenoblade 2's main story. Then, based on what we've seen from the trailers, Xenoblade 3 is probably Episode 6. And we don't know what's going to happen here or in future games, which is honestly pretty exciting. It's also possible that this is the end of the story they've wanted to tell. If Perfect Works is still just 6 parts, and Xenoblade 3 represents part 6, maybe they've written nothing past it. Maybe they have a new Xeno sub-series they want to work on afterwards. That's pretty unlikely, though. I would be lying if I said I thought this was the only possible interpretation of the new Perfect Works. On this timeline, episodes 1 and 2 happen as normal, but the events of Xenoblade 1 and 2 have been shifted to become episode 3 instead of 5. Then, Xenoblade 3 moves on to become episode 4. This leaves room for Xenoblade X to slide on in and become episode 5. If you haven't seen my theory on Xenoblade X taking place after 3, you should give it a watch. This is also pretty funny from the standpoint of longtime fans, since Xenogears and X are actually both kinda similar in certain aspects, and they're both being slotted into episode 5 together. That leaves episode 6 as another unknown blank space. Is it X2, or maybe it's Xenoblade 4? I know just as much as you guys, so anything is possible, especially when the series has a reoccurring godlike object. I personally think this could go either way, but I do lean a lot more towards the first timeline that I listed off. What do you guys think? Am I a crackpot who's looking too far into this, or do you agree? Either way, leave your thoughts down in the comments, and let me know if there's a theory you want me to cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!